Open Activity 8.1 Parametric Constraints. Then scroll down to Resources. Click Activity 8.1a Parametric Constraints Practice. Then we want to open that Word document, and it's going to help us make an aluminum part, and we're going to make it mostly from parametric equations. So if you'll notice from the first image that we have here, we have variable names or parameter names that identify dimensions for us. And the same is true for the location dimensions of the holes. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do it with parametric constraints. So the first one, the overall height of a part is 2 inches. That's a numeric constant. The top width is a numeric constant, also of 0.5. The right height is parametric, and it's 1/4 less than half the overall height. And the overall width is 50% larger than the overall height. Now, to get my students better organized, and it's definitely better for students, I make sure they complete an Excel document where they put in all the equations that they're going to use. So I'm going to type in overall underscore height, and that's because Inventor does not like spaces. And it had an overall height of 2, and it was a type inches. Now, the next one was top underscore width, and it was 0.5, or it can be parametrically driven by making it equal to the overall height divided by 4, and that's also in inches. Now, you got to look at the verbiage on the next ones to get the right height correctly. So let's look at what we have to do there. So let's go back to the Word document, and we'll see that it is 1/4 less than half the overall height. So going back to Excel, it's equal to 50% times, and that's another thing your students will forget, the multiplication symbol, minus 1/4. So you can let your students work in teams to do this. I find it effective. You can team up a stronger with a weaker student. They both do their own Excel sheet, but they walk through the whole process. The next one was overall underscore width, and that was 50% larger. So you may have to talk to your students that at 1.5 will give me 50% more of a particular thing, or you can just add 1/2 of it. So you can do it multiple ways. So I want that right there to be equal to, they'll forget the equal signs all the time, equal to 1/2 of 1.5 times that, so it becomes 3. So I'm not going to go through and let you watch me type in all these values because you're capable of doing it, plus you need to kind of go through this activity yourself. But what I have already done is, in another document, I have all my stuff set up here. And you can see I can change the number to 2, and it automatically updates all of my numbers down through there. So I'm going to go ahead and use that Excel document going forward. So I'm going to hit save on that. And now we're going to go into Inventor. Now let's look at, this is the part that we eventually want to make. But I'm going to start from scratch. And I'm going to make a new part. So a new IPT. And when looking at that part in a Word document, I see this side right here, and I see it as an extrusion. So I'm going to draw that part in Inventor. So let me go ahead and get started with it. Start with a new sketch. And then I want to go ahead and make this part. I'm going to do it on the XY plane. That's the one that makes sense to me. So I'm just going to hit the line tool and make a line. And that particular line, I'm just going to stop right there, hit escape, and let's put the first dimension on there. So this dimension right here, I want to be able to be parametrically driven, but I don't have the ability to do that right yet. So let's go back and see how I can make that life a whole lot easier for me. I'm going to go to Manage. I'm going to go to Parameters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Excel file I just created, link it in, So 8.1 Parametrics was its name. And I'm going to tell it to start in A2 because the headers I don't want. So now I'm going to click Open. And it gives me a warning. Don't worry about that. Even when it's saved, it gives me that message all the time. So now we're going to get a whole bunch of user parameters. And there's all my nice parameters all set up for me. Now I'm going to go back to that sketch. I'm going to click Done. Go back to my 3D modeling area. I'm going to edit this sketch. So you can right-click Edit Sketch or double-click right on the symbol. And right here for this dimension, I'm going to say List Parameters. And I know that that dimension was overall width. So I'm going to click on overall width, check, and I hit the front and it'll zoom it back out for me. So now I have that dimension. Now there's two philosophies on doing this. One person feels that you can just dimension as you go each step, and there's other people like to just draw it. I don't have a preference or a strong opinion either way. I think it's just whatever makes sense to you. So I'm going to show you how some people do it that's a little different. So what they'll do is they'll draw these lines and get it kind of ballpark, because you can kind of get it ballpark from the standpoint of you have that first dimension. But the key is to get that first dimension on there. I don't recommend doing the ballpark shape unless you have at least the first dimension. If you don't do it that way, then sometimes when you put in that first dimension, it throws all your geometry off. So now I'm going to go ahead and dimension. So I hit D for dimension, and this right here, I want to pick my list, and it's the right height. I just hit the letter R and it jumps right to the right height. And I'm going to hit the dimension on the other side, and this happened to be the overall height. So I'm going to go list parameters, type in O, jumped right to overall height, check. And then I want to go ahead and dimension this one. And this one happens to be top. So you just go ahead and come to list parameters, T, top width, ready to go. So that gets the first dimensions in there. Now I can go ahead and hit E for extrude or finish sketch, whichever method you want to use. And for this right here, that's going to be the depth. So again, I can go to list parameters, hit D, jumps right to depth. Okay. And I'm going to zoom out. And that looks pretty much like what our part should look like. So we're off to a good start. The next thing, if we go back and look at the Word document, we got to put these holes on here. Now, there's two methods of doing that, and I've demonstrated both methods in the past. So I'm going to use the one I started off my ninth graders with, which is point centers. So we're going to start a new sketch on this plane, and it's going to take it to the wrong direction for me. So I got to remember when I'm looking at this, I'm going this direction. So I'm going to put my two centers on there, click and click, and then I'm going to say OK. Now it's time to dimension those. So you want to keep your orientation make sense to you. So I have that orientation. So the dimension from here to there is what I want to get. So I dimension from here to there and drag out. Now you may have to flop back and forth, or you may want to just print this out so you can look at it as you're going through. So we're going to look at the dimensions. Here it is. It says edge distance. So I'm going to go find edge distance. So I actually type edge distance, but I tend to have typos and that frustrates me. So I'm going to go to list parameters, hit E for edge, check. And I want the distance from here to here, which happened to be the whole center to center. See, I can start typing all that in, but you can see how that is just going to be an accident waiting to happen, especially with a long-term name like that. So I'm going to hit, and we want to do whole center to center. And then we want the location dimension from here to here, which happened to be the back edge. So, whoops. Click on that, list parameters, back edge, the holes, check. Now, notice what happened here. And that's because I want to make sure that these things line up, and my orientation's off, so I'm going to come over here and make sure I pick the right one. Now it brings everything back in. So that's going to happen when you're doing it. I don't worry about those sort of things. I just kind of go on. So I'm going to finish sketch. And let's go back to home. So now I'm going to hit H for whole. And one thing we're going to do is I want to do one at a time. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and deselect that one. Now I'm ready for this hole. Now this particular hole, I know has a diameter that is the lower hole diameter. Boom. It already had that, so I didn't have to go through my list. The depth, I'm going to have to list parameters because I didn't get lucky on that one. It's just called depth. So click OK. And I can see that it went too far. I made a mistake. Well, that mistake was you got to watch with your parameters because there is more than one depth. There is the depth, hole depth. And that's a mistake your students will make too. So that takes care of that. But oops, my crosshairs went off for my point. Well, that means I need to expand hole 1, click on it, and share that sketch. Now when I hit hole, that's going to be the hole fix. It's still going to have that wrong depth of hole, so I got to get up here and hole depth. And I also this needs to be something else. It defaults to lower. I want upper. And then I'm going to apply. So I have my holes. So we're looking pretty good so far. Now a lot of times I'll come over here and turn off the sketch. I don't like seeing it anymore after I've used it. So remember, a lot of times if you put too much geometry on one sketch, you'll have to share it, and that way, because it gets consumed by the actual feature. So that's what happened the first time with that first sketch 1. But we promoted it with share sketch, used it, and turned off its visibility. Now let's go ahead and plop to the bottom. I'm going to get on the bottom, and I want to sketch on it. And let's see if I'll center this up a little bit. And so I want to go ahead and I want to draw a rectangle. But before I do, I want to go ahead and project this geometry because I'm going to use it. I'm going to draw me a rectangle and draw it like this. And sometimes I try to snap it right on there. It depends on how good you are with that sort of thing. You can draw it off of it later on and say, okay, I want this collinear to that. When students don't do that, you end up slicing a thin slice. They think they're on the line, but they're really not. So now we want to go ahead and put some dimensions on this thing. So let's dimension this dimension right here. And that's got to be something to do with notch. Probably notch depth, if I remember correctly. Let's see, in notch depth. Check. And then I want notch width. So let's go there. List parameters. Hit in and notch width. And you see how parameters are making life tons easier for us. And this is going to be another listed parameter, and it's probably location, notch location. Check. Now what I'm going to do is hit E for extrude. Extrude that, and getting into a different view, I recognize I need that to make a cut. And you can be fussy about this and make sure that it says all, so it only cuts, or you just go to infinity. It won't make any difference in the making of the part later on. I click OK. Now I'm ready to do those fillets. So I'm going to use the fillet tool. I want that fillet and that fillet. And let's go those listed parameters again. Fillet radius. Got lucky there. Apply. And let's see. Did not get the other one. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the other fillet. And it's defaulted to fillet radius. Apply. Now I'm going to hit cancel. Hit home. Now I have that part. It looks like that part. So I'm going to go File. And I want to make sure I save it. This is from last night's lecture or whatever we want to call it, where we had class, and it's going to put it in that project. I didn't create a new project for this activity, but once you save it, what's really going to be neat is if I go back to Excel, so this right here, I'm going to change it to a 4. Notice all my numbers change. I'm going to hit save. Go back to Inventor. See this little thing up here? It says update, local update. Boom, it resized. Now, if you follow the directions according to the activity, yours won't perfectly resize because some of those are numeric constraints, and on mine I only have one numeric constraint. But you can see how nice it is. Anytime I change that Excel file, I go back here and change it, I will get an update or an opportunity to update. Now, what you'll find usually when you go larger, you won't have as many troubles as when you go smaller. And part of that reason is because these numbers right here, when I click update, it's easier to make larger. But if I go back there and to that Excel and make it too small, let's make it 1 inch. All right, you see I'm getting lots of really small numbers. So what's going to happen a lot of times is you get to a point that automatically, oh, I forgot to save. That's another thing I got to remember to do. Whoops, that's our original one. This is one, so you didn't have to watch me type everything in. And when I hit update, well, that one did pretty good. Doesn't look too bad. But let me just mess with it a little bit so I can really mess things up, as I am wont to do. See this negative number? That's when I'm going to run in trouble. So let's go ahead and save that and see what Inventor thinks about that. See? So that's the way that sets up. So that's a quick how to do parametric activity.